Hi everyone, my name is Nia. Welcome to today's live stream series, Let's Build Live, Document Analysis Agents. Today we have Alex McDonnell, our Director of Product Marketing here at Airtable, and Brajan Gatys, Senior Procurement Manager at Personio. Now, before we dive in, just a few quick housekeeping notes. You'll find helpful links under the Resources tab. You can answer questions throughout using the polls panel. Feel free to chat with fellow attendees. Just a heads up that the chat is for general discussion only. And if you have questions for our presenters, please drop them in the Ask Presenters panel. Now let us know where you're tuning in from. And now, before we kick it off, we'd love to hear from you. How is your team currently using AI for document workflows? Dropping that poll now, so please interact with it. Now I'm going to hand this off to Alex.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nia, and hello, builders. We are so thrilled to share some very exciting use cases with you today around document analysis, vendor management, procurement management with the incredible Brian, one of our top AI builders here on Airtable. Brian, I didn't tell you this actually, but I was just looking at the list of top 100 AI credit consumers on Airtable, and you are right near the top of that ranking, my friend. So quite a badge of honor. So Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, Personio, and how you've been using Airtable before we dive into this demo.
Yeah, that's exciting news that we're so far ahead. Hello, everyone. Very glad to be here. I'm Brian, working procurement at Personio. So we are an HR tech company here in Europe. And we are basically all in on Airtable. We run our whole procurement operations, P2P, and especially the contract management part directly in Airtable. We wanted to have something very flexible with AI natively built in, and that's how we would land with Airtable.
Awesome. So here's what's in store for today. We're going to do a quick primer on document analysis workflows and AI agents within Airtable. And then this is going to be Brian's show to take you through his end-to-end process for document, contract, and procurement review on the incredible scope of vendors that he purchases for at Personio as a small team for a multi-hundred million-dollar business. It's incredible the scale that Brian and the team have been able to achieve. So first up, I want to get everybody on the same page and share with you a quick primer on what we mean when we talk about document analysis agents in Airtable. So what I'm sharing with you right here is our contract operations template. This is one of our AI plays here on Airtable, and we'll share this as a resource for everybody to dive into as a nice, simple starting point for your own document analysis workflows. If you're totally new to Airtable, what you're looking at here is a table in the data layer. Each of the columns across here are called fields. Each of the rows is known as a record. And your fields in Airtable basically are a way to contain data. And we have a particular type of field here in this very first column for attachments. Every single record has an attachment associated with it. And in this case, our attachments are contracts, a contract between a vendor and a customer. Then to the right of that, we have a special type of field called a field agent. This is literally an AI agent inside of this field that is performing some kind of task or analysis for us. And so this first very simple AI agent that we have within Airtable has been given a prompt to act as a legal document analyst, look at the content of that document, of that attachment, and come back and tell us, in this specific case, what are the termination and renewal clauses for this particular contract. The way that we provide this information and this input to this agent is right here within the custom instructions section. We would add this field and make a reference to the field that we want it to look at. In this case, it's the document field. And so you can see here, we can refer to any of our fields as we do that. In this case, the field agent has been instructed to return from a set of options for cause, for convenience, and so on. So if I click run agent down here at the bottom, you'll see what these actually look like when they're running. So you get this nice little kind of animated generating state, and then those agents are going to come back with their response. This next one over, equally simple, has been asked to actually return the text of that clause, of that particular part of the contract. So it has found the appropriate section in the contract. In different contracts, it might be called different things. And so you're not relying on sort of brittle keyword-based automations. We actually have this AI agent that can go and think and complete the task with some degree of autonomy and independence. What I really love also is you get this nice citations feature. So you never just have to trust that agent's work. You can actually click right into the source of the document, and that agent will highlight for you, here's where I got that information. So those first two examples are just basic extraction, but where things get really exciting and where Brian's going to take us as well is with tasks that require some analysis and judgment. And so here's yet another agent, but this time we're not just asking for extraction. We're actually saying, make some judgments, give us some expert perspective on the content of this document, and give us an analysis of which terms present the most risk to both parties of the contract, such that when we prepare for negotiation and renewal with this vendor, we are going to be prepared with a set of priorities where we should focus our renegotiation and apply our leverage. An exact same thing here. This agent has gone and read the entire contract, and now rather than just kind of simply returning the extraction or a simple label of what's in that contract, it's actually doing some thinking. It's making some judgment about what's in there and providing expert commentary the way that a domain expert would. So that is the basic idea of how document analysis agents work within Airtable. So you provide this document on the record, then you provide that document to your agents that each have some task to either extract or analyze content from that record. So with that, let me pass this back over to you, Brian, as you pull up your base. We're going to see how Brian and the team at Personio actually have applied this to their overall procurement process in some pretty exciting and sophisticated ways. So Brian, take us through it.
Great. You can confirm that you can see my screen?
We have got it. Yes, sir.
Perfect. Yeah. So maybe as some context ahead of time, this is a demo. So I did this specifically for this demo. All of the data we see in the contracts, it's all fake. However, it's like 90% exactly what we have in production. I removed a couple things just to keep this in the time frame, but basically whoever watching this, you can basically copy paste this also into your environment. So as you said before, I explained the field agents, and I'm a big fan of field agents, and it's probably also the tool that we're using the most. We look at a couple of MSAs. We have standard fields that you can find in any CLM, which is a start date, an end date, and currencies, and the attachment that you explained. I think the biggest value for us with field agents is understanding that they are not just submitting, outputting text, but actually single select or multi-select fields, right? And my favorite one, it might seem simple, but for everyone who actually works with contracts, that's, I think, a big benefit, which is this contract type. So usually when in a perfect environment, I would get an MSA as a separate file. I would get an order form as a separate file. Now, in the real world, this is not happening. Every vendor we deal with puts this all into one file. Sometimes it's separate. Sometimes something is missing. And in our previous setup, it was very difficult for us to understand without opening the PDF file, what contract actually are we dealing with. I think for about half a week, we tried to split the PDFs into multiple files, and then it was just too much work. And then we basically came up with the setup where we have this field agent. And what it does, it reads the contract, right? So it doesn't go just by the name. And then it categorizes it into a master services agreement, data processing, order form, NDA, and so on. The super interesting thing, as mentioned before, that this is multi-select. This is not just text. So with multi-select, I can group, I can filter, I can sort way easier. And I always have the option to kind of describe a little bit what's happening here. We're using Claude. We're very big on Claude for contracts, and this runs automatically. So as we see here, all of these are categorized as MSAs, but I always have the option to just go and maybe correct it if it was, not correct. If the AI made a mistake, I can always just go in and update everything. And the benefit for us is without me opening the file, because the contract name is a formula, I can actually tell this is an MSA and an order form from January with Sapphire Translation Bureau. I don't need to open any file, right? So this might seem simple for a lot of people, but I haven't seen this in another CLM. That was a really big thing for us. Now, a couple of other things, just to dive in a little bit into these field agents. We're extracting the currency, usually stuff that you see on a contract, as well as a renewal clause and an SKU. Now, with the renewal clause, what's interesting is there are, I would say, like 3 kind of ways to extract data with Airtable, which is, first one would be a citation. Just tell me exactly what's in the contract word for word. The second would be kind of an analysis that you described before. It doesn't cite everything, it just kind of analyzes what's happening. And this I would put kind of in the middle. It's fairly a citation, but it's very standardized, right? As you see here, if we look into the renewal clause, the whole structure of the sentence is very, very identical. So it's, for me, as a if I work with the contracts, now we only have 20 here. In our real environment, we have 1,400 contracts, right? It's way, way easier to actually look at this at once. Now, the interesting thing is, because again, we are big field agent users, is if we look into the automation. So for something like dates, I preferred to just use Airtable automation for the parsing, and as well for line items.
I'm going to, as we switch over to automations, let's take a pause, make sure everybody understands what they're looking at. If you're not familiar with Airtable automations, this is another way to sort of programmatically take actions, generate data, update data within your app. So the same way that a field agent can do that within the context of that one structured field, automations are actually a great way to deal often with data in a more complex way. Maybe it's outside of a different field, or you need a certain format or multiple steps. That's where automation comes in. And Brian's going to break down for you here how he lays out the different steps of an automation, one of which is an AI transformation of the data contained in that contract. And what you'll see from top to bottom is right at the top where it says trigger, that's what this automation is listening for to decide when to run. And then when it does run, it's going to, in order, work through those actions.
Very good. So maybe how I usually look at automation versus field agent as a tip, if I only need to extract a data point, I want to keep it on the same record, and I'm not touching any other base, I just use a field agent.
Yep.
Automation, what we're doing, I want to link a vendor record to the contract. So I need to look up another table, and this is where automation actually becomes quite helpful. So let's go step by step through the automation and see a little bit what it does. So when I build these things, I always assume the user is lazy. I don't want to maximal click a button, but I don't want to have a lot of work of actually keeping these things updated. So I set this automation up that if there is an attachment, run it automatically. I don't want to click a button. If I upload something and it's an MSA, which again also happens automatically, this workflow is triggered. In the second step, we have our prompt, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. And it's, a very standard prompt. You can use Airtable Omni to write it, or to build the automation, or use any generic LLM model, and they will provide your prompt that way. Basically, what's happening, please, extract the vendor name with a little explanation what kind of vendor name I'm looking for. And here I'm outlining that it's not Personio. We are Personio, so the other company on the contract is the vendor. The dates, currency, and then most importantly, the line item. And this actually is a big game changer, because with Airtable, we have an output schema, and this is how we can force a specific JSON schema from the automation. When we think a little bit back, when ChatGPT launched, the problem was that if you uploaded 10 contracts, the output was 10 times totally different. And it's very, very difficult to automate if the output is not clean, and you can't really work with that. And with the output schema, Airtable allows me every single output will have the vendor name, will have the line items in an array, so I can work on that.
That you're always going to get that nice, consistent, predictable format. So just to compare how we started for folks with field agents, that was very simple tasks, right? Hey, which of the following 6 types of documents are we looking at here? MSA, order form, and so on. returning one of those options. Now what Brian needs to do is say, look at the entire contract, pull multiple data points off of it, including line items, which are a table unto themselves, right? Each line item is essentially an entire record. So we go from one record that represents that contract or that relationship to now relating that to multiple records in the form of line items. And that's something that's uniquely possible with Airtable as the kind of canvas or surface here, because it is a relational database at its core. So you can have that relationship between the high level document as our kind of main record, and then all of those individual line items, and we can create the records for each of those.
Correct. Another point that I think Airtable makes so much easier is actually working with files. Now, if you actually read a little bit into automating and using AI with files, you stumble upon RAG. And if you want to, especially, I think Airtable is really good for like business users, right? Not like actual developers, but actually business users in the trenches. And then setting up a RAG pipeline is not very trivial. And with Airtable, it's literally just drag and drop, right? So I have this MSA and I can just drag and drop a contract. That's it. And then based on that, my contract is already in Airtable. The automation starts and I don't need to deal with vector stores, with any pipelines, anything. So that makes it really, really easy. Now, let's move it to the next step. We are creating a new vendor record. We could potentially look for a vendor record, check if there are any duplicates, but to keep it simple, we're creating a vendor record. We're updating the contract with a status. So I always want my status to be open with the start date. And this is how we can, in Airtable, add data from a previous step. Mm-hmm. So if you look into this token here right now, I can actually look into the generated structured data, basically the output of this step. And here I can select the start or end date. So we're adding all of this information. And then the very, very cool thing is actually the line items, because line items for us live in a dedicated table. Because if I have 1 or 3, I can probably put this into a contract table. But if I'm dealing with, especially if people are watching that, are in a manufacturing production business, they will have purchase orders contracts with tens of hundreds of line items. Putting this all into one database is not really scalable. So we push this all into a separate one. And with this repeating through an array functionality in Airtable, if I click into this one, I can actually see it goes into every individual line item, gets the name, the price, the quantity, creates the record in that table, and relates it back to the contract.
So clean. Let's go over to your interface, Brian, where you present all of that on the contract level, including the line items. So this, for folks, is what the final output looks like, is this really clean, presentable interface, not only for Brian and the procurement team, but also for the stakeholders. So whatever that business stakeholder is that is doing the actual interaction with Wavefront Telecommunications in this example, they can come here and say, what are all the details about this contract? What actions are needed of me? And then if you scroll down a bit, Brian, those line items come through, not just as like kind of random text or unstructured data, but you get this clean table of line items with price, quantity, total information for each one associated with the contract. And then you can now perform analysis on this across all vendors. Like you could come in and say, what across all of our vendors, are we spending excessively maybe in certain areas for similar things? They may not be called the exact same thing. And so it may be difficult for a human to catch that. But AI that looks across all of this would be able to do that. You could do that kind of analysis with Omni. So this is laying the groundwork for that kind of operation and intelligence in the procurement process.
Definitely. What we build on top of this is how we set this up in a way is that the majority is done by automation, and we are just the human approval, right? Mm-hmm. So that we don't have to update any information manually. We don't have to click buttons. One thing that I think was very cool, we are parsing the signer of who signed the contract, and I'm syncing HR data from Personio into Airtable, and I can tell, hey, Brian signed this contract, pull his cost center, procurement apply it to the contract automatically. And automatically, because these usually don't show up on a contract, I have the department and the cost center, which also means the department, cost center owner or the department manager can have a clean overview, sees all of the contracts related to their department, and I just dragged and dropped the contract into Airtable. There wasn't really much work going into that, right?
So impressive. Speaking of adding those contracts in, there was a question in the chat, Brian, about how do these documents get in here in the first place? If you could tab over to the data layer, you keep the screen share, but I'll just talk through a couple different things. Maybe one, if you have one of your sample fictional contracts here ready, Brian, if you could just show dragging and dropping it straight into the data layer, into that bottom tray that will pop up.
Sure. So if you go through this data layer, the best is probably if you just drag and drop here, and then you can pull them here. We see
so that's option one for the individual who asked that question, is literally just take that file from your desktop, drag it right into data layer. And then if you scroll over to the left, Brian, we'll show them where the attachment actually comes in, or wherever your attachment field is. There it is over on the right. And now you see at the very bottom there where it says analyzing files in blue, those agents have been triggered because a new contract got added. Boom, they know that they need to go and run. These ones are pulling, looks like currency, renewal clause, and some of the SKU data. So that is like the most simple and direct way. Yeah. Now, and because there's, as Brian's showing, that run automatically. There are also, Brian, if you hit the plus sign at the tables level, right beside at the top for you where it says 2 hidden tables, you got where you have the vendor table, the contracts table, and then not the field, but adding an entire new table. There we go. Down under more sources, 26 more sources. So you can actually set up a sync if you scroll down to Box, to Google Drive, wherever those contracts live. You can set up a table that will watch that folder in Google Drive or in Box or wherever and create a new record on a dedicated table, and also pull in that entire attachment content and update it if that file gets updated as well. So you don't have to go like from your desktop dragging things in. If these contracts already live in some kind of cloud storage file system, you can connect that up to Airtable and then use Airtable as the analysis and operational layer on top of the document content. Awesome.
Great. If you want to have a more, more, fielded, again, this is a demo, but if you want to have a more controlled environment to upload these and force end users to submit additional information, you can add these forms in here, right? Again, didn't remove this field, and then people can just drag and drop it right here as well. Mostly we're just drag and dropping it into here. There is a trigger in Airtable automation on email received. So you can actually save a contact in Google Contacts to Outlook, forward an email. It will fetch that email, put this into here as well.
Awesome.
But great. Let's move to the next portion. So we covered the service agreements, and now we're looking at data privacy agreements. And this is kind of a contract where we are doing a little bit more analysis, right? We're a European company, so data privacy is quite critical to us. And we came up with, I think, with a quite nice process that allows us to review these contracts, but most importantly, have a system of records. So before I show it exactly how that looks, we started basically with a guideline, and this is years ago, just a long Google document with individual clauses. So I had my contract open, my guideline, and then I would just comparing clause by clause. It took an hour, right? Eventually, GPT came out, and then you were uploading a contract, talking to GPT. But the problem with that is that if I do it, my manager doesn't see the analysis. And if I want to look at this analysis 2 days later, you're not going to find it anymore, right? It's somewhere lost in my history. So we wanted to have an interface where in 2 years, I can still put all my DPA analysis from the past. For an audit, for example, that we went through recently, I could just click a button, download all my analysis, right? So let's explain a little bit how that works. It's the same concept that we described before. The field agents are just pulling different kind of information. And what we're doing is we're always pulling first, we're extracting information, and then in the second step, we're analyzing it or categorizing it. So in this, let's look at the processing activity. It runs automatically. It's Claude. And then the prompt says you're an expert in DPAs, and your core job is just understanding the processing activity. I'm not giving a very long prompt to this agent that has to analyze 20 clauses, just the processing activity, not more. And then it basically just outputs me, as simple as it is, the processing activity. So I can look into the summary, there's an assessment, and then I can actually see what data is processed and how the data is processed. This is actually stuff we have to look into and review. Let's take another example, duration and purpose. So I'm going into here, the persona. Again, you're a legal expert, and your job is to just read this DPA and extract duration and purpose, not more. And the result is, if we look into this, tells me the duration, it tells me the purpose. So very, very accurate. Now, the cool thing about this is, as you mentioned before, I can look into the sources, and then it will actually show me exactly where it pulls that information. So if there's anyone who doesn't really trust AI or has a bad feeling of, with actually just letting this go through, you can always go back and actually see where this data is coming from.
That's right. Yeah, we just had a question actually pop up in the chat, Brian, which was, how do you actually operationally verify the outputs of AI, even if it's 99%, right? People can be concerned about that 1% being wrong and causing some liability or risk or something like that. So citations is a big one. What other techniques do you and your team use to make sure that you're always vetting the work of AI for accuracy?
For everything critical or material, we always look at it ourselves, but we're not spending an hour doing it anymore. We're spending 5 minutes maybe, right?
Yeah.
So for everything, we're in procurement. So a lot of stuff we do that's not even related to contracts ends up on the P&L, becomes financially relevant. So especially for us, it's very, very important that the data we produce is accurate, and we included a lot of human in the loops into our processes. But what's important to learn is that before, we've been doing the whole process. Maybe we didn't have this approval step because we did it ourselves, but we minimized this just to a 5-minute check. So we're still are way, way more efficient compared to the past, right?
Totally.
And then last, before I jump into the interface, this is my favorite part, where I can actually have multi-select and single select fields. So when we came up with this guideline, I spoke with our data privacy lawyer, and we said, okay, there are X amount of kind of data categories that a DPA can have. So instead, having the agent just extract what it is, because, for example, contact billing and payment data, there might be 20 different terms for this across 20 different contracts. So Airtable understands it and translates it for me into this one specifically, right? So it really, really makes it puts in the structure and categorizes this.
And having that kind of distinction too relates to your previous point, because maybe each of those categories of personal data correlate to a different level of risk. And according to those levels of risk, that's how you and the team would allocate your time for deeper reviews or more thorough reviews as necessary, as opposed to needing to spend hours reviewing every vendor to comb through all that kind of detail.
That's correct, yeah. So let's jump into the actual interface and let's show how it looks. And again, the name, we covered this, the contract type. The good thing is, if maybe people miss this, it's the same table as the service agreements. So when I set up this contract type, I repurposed it across everything. So the only thing I added was basically this portion. And let's maybe go step by step through it and explain what's happening here, because I genuinely think there's a lot of benefit in that.
Yep.
We have a DPA risk. And what we basically did is, when we work with numbers, for example, with numbers, automating with numbers, quantifying numbers, super easy. You can compare numbers very, very easily. But contracts are words, and written content, written data is very difficult to categorize, to structure, and especially compare. If I have two clauses in one DPA that are horrible, but the other one is really good, and the second DPA, it's kind of average, How do I can confidently say this DPA is better than that, or vice versa? It's very, very difficult to achieve that. So I like numbers. So we said, I want to have a specific number for every DPA that we have. And this one is this DPA risk. So how do we get actually to quantifying contracts? As I mentioned before, we have, I counted this before, 36 different kind of field agents running on a contract that categorize 18 clauses or 18 area sections of a DPA. In the first step, this is basically the left column that we see here is just the extraction. So here, PII, is there personal information processed? Yes or no? I don't need to understand yet what kind of. This comes later. I just need to know yes or no. And it tells me yes or no. And in the second, this is the right column. This is the playbook alignment, how we called it. So we sat down with our lawyers and we said, our playbook is basically the ideal state. This is what we're looking for in a contract. But we didn't go by a specific clause or a specific phrasing. It's just the idea. In the processing activity, we want that the processing activity is clearly outlined, understandable, and so on. We don't really define the actual words that have to be there because it's not really feasible. And then the alignment tells me it aligns with my playbook. So PII, it's fine with me. It's neutral. I might not like it, but it's not horrible. And then it deviates. No, whatever is in the contract, it doesn't align with what I have in my playbook. And every of these kind of questions on the right side are weighted, and all of them, it's like a very, very big formula. All of the and the weighting goes into this DPA risk. So
considering all of that complexity, all of that detail, that all gets rolled up into this clean, single, objective number that, again, allows you to prioritize and say, wait, there's a vendor that we're spending 6 figures with that presents a high DPA risk. Okay, we need to spend a deep amount of time on that. Whereas the other vendors, they're 90% aligned with what we want. We're not spending as much. There's no PII. We can deprioritize that for now. Like that, to be able to spend your precious time in such an intelligent way is such a huge deal.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I want to make sure folks have an appreciation also, Brian, for how these field agents know what aligns or what deviates from your standards. Could you touch on how those field agents are provided with that context in order to make that judgment?
Sure. So there were 2 kind of ways we thought about doing it. We went with just prompting every field agent individually. Yep. And then, so for example, here it tells me, determine, allow if employee, vendor, contractors are selected, output align. If something else, output neutral, right? So we prompted all of these individually. But what I did, I opened Omni and we wrote down everything into a Google Docs. And I just pasted for field agent 1, I just pasted the section, dumped it into Omni, waited a minute, and then did the same thing, right? Just did it 36 times, so it took an hour. But basically, I didn't prompt them all individually myself. It was all done with Omni. The second way we were thinking about, and this is maybe more helpful for people that have a more updated, more dynamic playbook, is having a dedicated table with every clause and the align, or like kind of the playbook we want to see. For us, wasn't that dynamic. We updated maybe 2-3 times per year maximum. So we said let's see a bit easier and just prompt the field agent.
I want to take a moment to generalize this concept a little bit for people because it's so powerful. And this is what takes working with agents in Airtable up to a different level versus working with, maybe your typical chatbot where kind of every chat is like you're starting over. So within Airtable, you can do what Brian's done, which is directly in the prompt for each field agent, you can give it the specific context and instruction to complete that task. Also, as Brian mentioned, you don't have to sit there and write out those custom instructions yourself. You can ask Omni, which Brian just opened on the left-hand side, to create a field agent that does XYZ. And you can just describe your intent for what you want that agent to do, and it will create the agent to perform that task. Those custom instructions are best when they're very detailed, but you don't have to worry about specifying that detail yourself. You always can get inside and make surgical edits to those prompts if needed, but you don't have to start with that. So Brian did that for each of the factors of data processing that he cares about for every vendor. Those each get a pair of field agents that work together. The first one on the left with text is just objectively saying what is in the contract. So the one on the left doesn't need to know yet about whether that behavior aligns with our standards or not. The second one, which is making a judgment, does this align? Is this deviate? Is this neutral? That one is making a determination. That one's making an analysis. So that one needs to know what actually matters to us. We also see, to draw a parallel to some other functions, teams doing something similar for something like, let's say, analyzing marketing assets against brand guidelines. Well, how does that agent know what our brand guidelines are? We may need to put that directly into the prompt. The other way is you can also have your agent refer to a document or a resource elsewhere. So in Google Drive, for example, you could have your brand guidelines document. Another setup that Brian could have done if his data processing guidelines were more dynamic. Let's say they're changing all the time. In his case, they weren't. So it's okay to just do it directly in the prompt and more straightforward that way. But let's say I have a document that describes all my brand guidelines. I would point my field agents to that document and say, go read the document, which may change every time it runs, but if it's something quite dynamic, then use that context to come back and fulfill the task that you've been assigned. So really, really powerful concept there when you think about how do I get my agents the context that they need to be able to perform this job at the level of expertise that an employee would.
Maybe 2 points that I would still add here. If I don't like the output, I can edit it and Airtable will tell me it was edited by me. And this is especially powerful if I'm not a single player team, I'm not a one-man show, I actually have a team that works with me, because my colleague, my manager can go into this, I'm on vacation, they go into Airtable, they can actually see the score and see, oh, Brian edited this. So maybe let's figure out why, right? There could be like a commenting function as well, but we just kept it lean. And just to show a little bit, if I would put these things, deviates, the number goes up automatically because it's a formula. So it's very dynamic. When we went through our audit recently, we had to provide evidence that we are reviewing our contracts. The auditors don't care how I review them and if the review was good and if I bought it. I just have to demonstrate I did it. Now, if you do it just in Word with a couple of comments, it's going to end up in some OneDrive. You're never going to find it again. If you just use it in ChatGPT, you're never going to find it again. And here, with 2 button clicks, print all contracts, you can, I download like about 50 of these contracts that we had there anyway. Just send everything to the auditor, the more the better, and everything was fine, right? It's
unbelievable. We had a customer who is in the sports gambling space, obviously is a very highly regulated space. And so every single piece of marketing and creative that goes out the door is subject to very specific guidelines in the US. It's state by state. They're very specific. And because Airtable was their system, very similar to what you do with contracts, they do with marketing assets, every asset had a paper trail, a digital paper trail in Airtable of what regulations it was subject to, what reviews it went through, why it was approved, any revisions it went through. And they were able to send that to their auditor and get a clear report back from the auditor, to the point where the auditor was almost suspicious of how quickly they were able to deliver on that report. Like, that's how powerful and impactful these systems are when you just have the habit of this review and traceability built right into your daily operations.
I think what's important to mention here is this looks very well documented. I'm really bad at documentation, and also I'm not a fan of it, and I tend to be quite lazy with uploading things and documenting. But that's why we built this system, because we have to have documentation. I just don't want to do it, right? Yeah. So the system built the foundation for me to, with little effort as possible, I just want to upload 20 contracts and then it's all documented. That's why we use AI and automation so much. The only thing I need to do is just approve everything. And then it's kind of insurance, right? You don't really need it when it's happening, but when you need it at an audit, you're quite happy about it.
You're grateful for your past self.
Kind of. Maybe the last thing, before we go to the contracts, is you can actually look at files, right? You cannot edit the document itself, but I can actually go in here and be like, what is this?
Yeah.
Okay, what's happening? I can, mark things. I can download it. Please edit how I like to do it. And then when I download it without with annotations, it's basically, if you open this PDF in any PDF kind of tool, the comments show up. I think the problem with CLMs is people never use your CLM if you send it to a vendor or to a third party. They always download the file, always open it in there. So CLMs usually have kind of like this internal, external commenting function, but people never use it because they prefer their own system. So here we said, okay, let's not try to make them work in our system. I'm just going to do it here, and they can open it wherever they are.
So smart. Let's do a couple questions from folks watching, Brian. So Ricardo asked, I need to extract data from invoices. Invoices might have between 1 and 15 products or line items. I'm thinking about having an invoice table and then another table that will have each product as a record. How do I make one automation that creates multiple records that are linked to the same invoice? So if you go back to your automation, Brian, you got it for structured data. Ricardo, it would be almost identical to what Brian has done here. The one addition in your case is you would also want to be able to refer to a table that is your master table of all products. Because Brian's line items are not sort of referring to like a master list of everything that Personio could ever buy from all vendors, that's a bit of a different scenario. Whereas if you are generating and then extracting data from invoices, you would have a set of all of your SKUs that you can refer to. So maybe similar to Brian, if you click into where you're generating structured data and you generate the product, you may just need to specify, Ricardo, that those products need to follow a set format, and you can then rely on those agents to extract that for you. Now, if your invoices themselves already used a consistent naming convention or SKU numbers or something like that to represent those products, then you're all good. And you can establish the relationship between, in your case, 3 tables. You would have the invoice, the line items, multiple line items per invoice, and then products. Products would be referred to at the line item level.
Yep. What you could do is you can actually, if you have a clear naming convention or, as Alex mentioned, a SKU ID, you can then actually find records from the products table and then match them with the line item directly within the automation as well. We have a very, very similar setup where we use the contract, and then I have a button right here. I click Create PO. It takes the line items, it takes the attachment, and generates the PO automatically from the contract. And it's kind of the same thing. Similar as here, we look for line items, we look for cost centers, for spend categories, a lot of like ERP data, and then everything is matched on the line item that is then related to the PO. And I have a very similar overview here. So that's definitely easily manageable.
Yeah, Ricardo, one last thought. I was actually working with a customer on something similar to what you were doing, and I'm not sure how far along you maybe are in your Airtable journey or your data journey, but they had all the invoices. What they did not have was the data set of all of their products, or their parts. In their case, it was a manufacturing company. So they actually wanted to use the invoices to generate the data set of parts. And so that's a kind of a different angle on this, where you would do the extraction. For every part that has ever appeared on an invoice, you would create that record on the parts table or the products table. And then if it comes up more than once, you're not creating that record again. You're just going to refer to that record and link to it. And you can do all that in Airtable. So maybe if you're potentially in that situation as well, you could go from invoices to the actual product database if you don't have that in a clean way already. Another really good question here, Brian, from Janelle. Janelle asked, if you have a bulk set of PDFs that just need to be properly connected to the grid of vendors that you already have, how would you efficiently upload all of those documents, maybe a script to properly assign or sort to the right vendor? So Janelle, if you already have that table of vendors within your data set, within Airtable, Brian, if you could head to the data layer, I think you called your table here. Yeah, you have a vendor table as well as a contracts table. So you have a one-to-many between those?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so you could have many contracts or many documents for one vendor. So Janelle, imagine if you have a vendor table, you have a similar setup here to Brian, where you would upload all of your documents either through a gigantic drag and drop, how Brian showed, or by linking over to Box or Google Drive or wherever those live. To match it to the right vendor, there's actually a new dedicated type of field agent that could work really well for you here, especially in the case where the vendor is ABC Inc. in your table, but on the document, it's ABC Incorporated. And that is called Deep Match. And so Deep Match is a way, Brian knew exactly where I was going here. So if you upload all your contracts, but we don't know who the vendor is, we could have a deep match that allows linking. We could say, do not link to multiple records. We could say every contract is only tied to one vendor. So you could toggle that off. And then you could say, use the content of this contract to go and figure out which vendor this is actually related to. And then Brian, if you could hit the add field button down in the bottom in the custom instructions, you can provide this agent content from the attachment of the contract and content about that vendor, maybe the vendor's name, as well as a description or whatever other information would help to make sure it's matching to the correct vendor. You give it all that context, and then it would actually go and run an analysis and say, all right, I've got this contract. Let me scan through the whole vendor list. Okay, boom. The vendor is Airtable Inc. or the vendor is Databricks. And you would then establish that relationship. So Deep Match actually returns a linked record to the table that you already have in your case, which is that vendor table.
Yeah. Maybe to add to that, because every record, like in our actual base, I have about 10 different tables, and every table is related to another one. So we link a lot. And I'm a big fan of these filters. So with the vendor, you could actually say, please only look at vendors that are active. So all the in onboarding or inactive vendors, please let's not consider them for deep match, or actually just go to a specific view, for example. So that's
a great call. Yeah. So if there are some smart filters you can do to narrow down the list of vendors that it could possibly be, that will speed up and create some good economics for your deep match as well.
Yeah. I would argue that that's 20 minutes job, right? You see upload your supplier via CSV, connect Google Drive or Box, OneDrive, set up Deep Match. So it's actually a very, very straightforward solution.
Very simple. Yeah.
Should we move to the last part?
Yeah. Let me just check on a couple other questions here, Brian. People are super interested in what you've been sharing. Amy L, if a table had duplicates, am I safe in assuming that Airtable could identify potential duplicate records? Yes, in a couple different ways. It would be an issue not totally specific to document analysis, so I'll just touch on it quickly. There is an extension for deduplicating Airtable records that relies on it being character for character the same or very, very similar. It will catch simple things like periods and commas. If you have anything that's kind of a tricky or fuzzy duplicate, Deep Match is actually another great tool for that. Again, so you can use Deep Match within the same table to say, are there any other records within this table that have a very similar name? So again, that could be Airtable Inc. versus Airtable Incorporated versus, Airspace table. All of those things would be caught by Deep Match and not so easily caught by a keyword or character-based deduplicator. So definitely possible. Riley has a use case, Brian, extracting SMS copy from a compliance document. If there are multiple SMS messages, how would I instruct the agent to create a new record for each SMS? Do I need to structure the compliance doc in a certain way or train the agent? I think Riley is referring to SMS just as in like text messages there. Riley, feel free to post in the chat if you're referring to something else. But within a single document, you have multiple SMS, essentially line items, it sounds like. So I think the same technique that Brian used to go from contracts to line items, or that we were talking about to go from invoice to line items, would apply to you as well. So from that automation, we would generate structured data. We would take over anything that's just about the overall document, and then we would have a SMS items table perhaps for each one, and you would capture whatever properties of each SMS that you need to in terms of each document, and that could be 0, 1, or many for each of those.
Yeah, I also understand the SMS copies on the contract itself, right? Basically, if you want, Riley, screenshot this, basically same concept. Just look for SMS, and then you want to have an output important, array, object, and then SMS, because if you have an array, you can iterate through the array. So if you have 20 different kind of SMS copies, it will create 20 different records by iterating through this line item, but it's probably easier if you just make a screenshot and then use this for your use case.
Yeah, this setup is kind of like a level 2, a little more intermediate than just using the field agent for a single value, but this is where you get the power of extracting many things from one source. So many great questions in here, Brian. I want to do a few more. So another question here from Zan. Is this extraction document or activity specific, or can we say, for example, take a value extracted from a document and update some master value? So like adding revenue from a sale to a total revenue. You can absolutely do that, Zan. So once that information is out of the document in Airtable, if you could head back to the data layer, same idea here. Brian has a one-to-many relationship between vendors and contracts. So Brian's on the spending side here. We've been talking about procurement. But if you were on the sales side and you had each of these contracts with a customer and you had a total revenue on each of these, Brian, if you could maybe just quickly show adding like a currency field to the end of this.
This actually, yeah.
Yeah, you've got one here already. Yeah, so there's like a dollar value for each of those. Over on the vendor table, we would do what's called a roll-up. And so we would actually say, look at all of the contracts this vendor is associated with, or in your case, customer, perhaps, if it's revenue. If you could just show adding a roll-up field, Brian, all the way at the end.
This is actually a roll-up.
You already have one?
Yeah, on the contracts. Amazing. And the roll-up pulls from all the
come prepared. Look at that. Perfect. So it is actually looking at, it's already it's on the contracts. Yeah, same idea. So we can say for all of the records that this particular record is associated with, in this case, we're looking at contract to items. Remember, Brian broke out each of the individual line items on his contract. Look at the price, and then that very simple expression down at the bottom, sum up all the values, and then Brian, if you hit save, we can show the end result of a roll-up like this. You get that sum. And so if any new line item were to be added to these contracts, or if any new contract were to be added for that company, that total roll-up value would be reflected. Okay, now, Brian, this could be a good transition. Lars asks, could you show up how to set up an agent to research companies and announcements? I think if you have this ready for your demo, this is the second piece, right, which was the web research-based risk assessment.
That's a very, very good question and a perfect timing to move over.
Excellent.
So we have a whole vendor monitoring system in place that's very, very cool, and I'm super excited to show this. Just simply on the data view, I see we still have 5-8 minutes. It's the same concept as with the contracts. We just apply this to vendor. In the first step, we are gathering data from the internet, for example, and by the way, we're not affiliated with these companies, Notion, right? And I can pull all the sources from the internet. Before, we've been pulling this data from our own document, internal data. This is from the internet. And in the second step, I'm categorizing it into risk. Is it severe, substantial, moderate, or negligible? If we go into this interface, it will make way more sense. So we have multiple risk factors, which is financial risk, market risk, geographical, data privacy. And again, same concept. In the first step, I'm getting a lot of information from the internet. Now, this is an individual prompt where, I say reputable websites, for example, investor reports, preferred, and I do believe there is already an Airtable. You have this like an agent for that already pre-configured. Again, I see the sources, and then it shows me, is it severe, substantial, moderate, or negligible? So for my financial risk, I prompted, if it's a company that's profitable, it can't be severe, right? If it's a company never turned a profit and is losing money and maybe growth is not as high, then make it substantial. If we look into market risk, same concept. We're looking into market share, growth trends, competitive positioning. For me, something like technological obsolescence was important. Like in 10 years, especially with AI, will this company still exist? It looks at all of this information. So like 4, 6, 8, 9 different kind of field agents, and then it gives me a market risk. Is there severe risk, moderate, substantial, or negligible? The Notion is a good product, right? in a good space, so hence it's a bit lower. Same, we look into geographical risk, where for me as a procurement manager is important. Are they opening maybe offices in my area? So they want to have my logo, and I have some negotiation opportunities. This one is our favorite for our secure and data privacy team, like the actual data incidents, reputation, and so on, right? And we capture all of that information with individual prompts with field agents, and then per section, so per ESG risk, for the data privacy risk, I have a formula with a weighting. So here 80% risk, and all of this ends up in this vendor score. So same concept as with the contracts. Here actually way easier, because public information, you can just pull it from the internet. So it's a bit easier to manage, but basically same concept. And now I can confidently say, Notion is more risky for me than Databricks, because maybe the financial risk, right? Maybe the geographical risk. To add another point, and maybe it's going to be a question, because these things we don't do on an annual basis. For us, it's a continuous process. So we added this frequency, which is a formula that looks into the vendor score and a couple of other factors, and it updates automatically. So if we assume I onboard a vendor not really used within the team, good financials, no data privacy risk, it has a very low score, and then the frequency would be, for example, biannually or quarterly. It's not very important. Now they have a huge data privacy incident. Maybe they have some investigations going on. So data privacy would go up automatically into severe, substantial into severe, based on the frequency, right? Now this would go to weekly automatically, because the risk is higher. Hence, it's more critical for me. Hence, I want to be updated more and more about this particular vendor. So automatically, the frequency goes up into weekly. And every Monday, we have an automation that gets all of this information and sends me a proactive notification alert in Slack. Hey, Brian, Databricks, Notion, or AWS, it just went into severe AI written, and then it gives me like a little overview. Maybe they had a data breach, right? Or some new product came out that made them, whatever. And this is kind of like a self-feeding system that gets information, categorizes it, and lets me know. And it's actually quite interesting, because this is one of the tabs I have open 24/7, and you really see the vendors moving. Like I think we do have a really good overview on our top 20% of vendors by vendor score, and you really see them moving, right? Every time something updates, and that's actually quite interesting to look at.
It's incredible. It's so powerful. So not only do you have what's in your documentation and your contracts, but you also have this pulse on what is dynamic and what is moving in the actual news about these vendors to assess risk for Personio the moment that risk emerges, not waiting around till renewal, or not waiting for some business critical issue to show up when it was weeks or months old that the risk signals were there. Amazing.
Cool.
Awesome, Brian. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that incredible tour through Brian's system. Again, recapping what we shared, we went through document analysis basics, as well as some of those more advanced topics like generating records across multiple tables, like line items, associating that all between vendors and contracts, the analysis against your business context as well, where you were looking, Brian, at that DPA standard and the rules that either vendors are aligning with or deviating from, how the agents are able to perform that analysis. And then to really put some flourish on it, we even have web research on each of those vendors for all those contracts to enrich that information that we have. I want to plug a couple things before we hit the top of the hour. So the Airtable AI plays are available in the resources and handouts tab, as well as the QR code on the screen. You'll see a template there for document analysis, as well as for web research, which are the two components of Brian's solution that we talked through today. I hope we answered your questions to your satisfaction. We got to as many of those as we could. The other resource I'd like to share with you is a walkthrough that our own Airtable procurement team did recently on their vendor management process. If this is your use case, then you will really enjoy that one as well. Brian, any last words or advice for folks who are building out their document analysis agents in Airtable?
I think two things. So just get started. I'm not a fan of watching lots of YouTube videos and trials. Just like actually get your hands dirty. And the second thing, I would really put a focus on data accessibility. If you want to work with data that's hidden in some very old tool legacy, Airtable, you need to get it into an environment where you can actually add AI and automation on top. And we use Airtable for a lot of that. So we have an ERP that's not super fun to work with. We get everything out of into Airtable, and there we can actually build very, very cool processes. So I would put a focus on putting as much data into Airtable and then using it to connect it together from multiple sources, because this is where Airtable really, really shines.
That's awesome. Yeah, Airtable is where you and your team and your agents can actually work together on that data. Very cool. Anas, is there another lecture this week? I hope this didn't feel like a lecture, my friend. I hope it felt very interactive and dynamic. But yes, this is an ongoing series, not this week. But over the next coming weeks, we will have a variety of different topics and use cases with folks from Airtable as well as customers like Brian. So until next time, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you everyone for joining. Please keep a lookout for our resources and an email with the recording as well to watch at your convenience, and the next one too. Have a great rest of your day.